very little of that is actually taught in the New Age and witchcraft. Instead, they push this narrative that everything is good, all experience is great, and you should be opening yourself up as much as possible to anything. Hi guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Louisa. If you're new, feel free to subscribe, and if you enjoy this video, give it a thumbs up and feel free to share it. By the way, if you hear stirrings and rustlings and different noises while I'm talking, first of all, I live in a very noisy inner city kind of area, and I have pets. For those of you who don't know, I used to have another channel on YouTube, and that channel was all about witchcraft. There was a blog that went with it, and a Facebook group, and also a Instagram page. And at the height of that witchcraft channel on YouTube, I had about 43,000 subscribers. So yeah, I was pretty heavily involved in the local pagan community. And for those of you who don't know, modern day paganism and modern day witchcraft is very much based on the New Age. There are some different variations depending on people's cultural backgrounds, because there are some places where witchcraft has been practiced throughout history. So there's large parts of Asia and Africa and South America and different places like that where there is actually still quite a long history of local witchcraft and shamanic practices. So I'm not necessarily referring to that stuff when I talk about the witchcraft practice, which is what you would mostly find in the Western world these days. Most of the witchcraft practices that you will find in Western countries such as Australia and the US and England is actually based on the New Age. So I do tend to use those terms a little bit interchangeably. Okay, so a little bit of background about me. I was raised Christian from about the age of 7. Before that, my mum was really into the New Age, and she played folk music, so she was like kind of like a pagan musician, and so that world was kind of quite familiar to me. But growing up in church after that, that also became very familiar to me, and I was quite devoutly Christian until I was about 21. And at the age of like 18, 19 years old, I had aspirations to be a nun. Because I used to sing in the church choir, there was like this small group of nuns that did a lot of the music ministry, and I thought that that was like the most awesome lifestyle that I had ever seen. And of course, I loved God, and I didn't really imagine that any relationship would be able to take that place. My parents had divorced when I was about 2 years old, so I was raised by a single mother, and I never really saw much example of successful marriages. So roughly when I was 16, I kind of decided that I was never going to get married. And then of course later on I got married twice and divorced twice, because unfortunately I didn't really know what it took to have a successful relationship, and I chose people to surround myself with who were not Christian, and so I didn't really meet anyone who had the same kinds of values as that. Like, they did not value commitment, they did not value me. They were really only interested in what I could do for them and what purpose I could serve for them. And it was kind of a similar story with a lot of the friendships that I had as well, where it wasn't so much about respecting me as a person, it was about whether I could do things for them. And of course, growing up with the Christian ethos, I had a tendency to serve. And I also had a few codependent tendencies from my mother, because she was extremely needy when I was a kid, which is a whole other kettle of fish. I'm sure I will talk about that at some point. But what I really wanted to talk about today is how I found out the hard way the teachings of Jesus, where he says, be in the world, but not of the world, actually is extremely important. And that is exactly what I found in witchcraft and what I want to talk about today, why witchcraft is actually dangerous for you. Yeah, so the first thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of why witchcraft is risky actually comes back to the issue of values, which doesn't really seem like it relates, but I will explain. So one of the underpinning principles of witchcraft and magic in general and the New Age with its manifestation, law of attraction, is that it's okay to use people and situations to get what you want. And it also says that it's okay to use higher powers to get what you want as well. So some of the time they assume that what they're accessing is God, but other situations they call on different spirits and entities to assist them. And it's kind of promoted as this risk-free way of going about things, and it is not risk-free. So there's a couple of kind of occult laws that you would come across in witchcraft and the esoteric and the New Age. So the first one was Aleister Crowley's law, which was do as thou will. He was like, that's it, that is the whole of the law, do as you will. Modern day paganism kind of softened that one a little bit. They had their own law, which was and it harm none, do as thou will. But the thing is, like, how do you determine what is harm? And you might be thinking about the harm that you might do to other people, but what about the harm that you're doing to yourself? So practicing discernment was very much discouraged. Discernment is one of the underpinning principles of Christianity, and there's a whole set of the gifts of the Holy Spirit which are centered around wisdom and discernment and using your faculties to test the spirits. Very little of that is actually taught in the New Age and witchcraft. Instead, they push this narrative that everything is good, all experience is great, and you should be opening yourself up as much as possible to anything. So I would come across 3 different mindsets when I was in this particular community. And the first one was, if you use discernment, then you're prejudiced. The second one was, if you have boundaries, then you are intolerant. And the third one was that if you choose better for yourself, then you are judging others harshly. To give you some idea of how this works, I'm going to use a parable of my own. Unfortunately, not one that Jesus used, but there probably is one. Anyway, I'm going to use my own metaphor, so bear with me. Imagine that the world is addicted to cigarettes, but you have researched all of the papers and stuff on smoking, and you know it's incredibly bad for you. It's expensive, it ruins your teeth, gives you bad breath, can lead to lung cancer. So you're like, I'm not gonna smoke. That's a bad idea. And you've also researched that secondhand smoke is almost as damaging as just smoking yourself. So you decide not to hang out with people while they're smoking. So that doesn't mean that you tell everyone else that they can't smoke, because you understand that they have their own choices to make and they have free will. But just the very act of deciding for yourself that you're not going to smoke is then seen as an indictment on their choices. You used your discernment, you set a boundary, and you chose better for yourself. But the world then turns around and says, if you're not smoking with us or smoking our second-hand smoke, then you are prejudiced, intolerant, and judging us. And I'll give you a real world example of how that works. When I was in my early 20s and I was at university for the first time, I'm at university again, I went through a breakup, and my housemate at the time said, you know what will make you feel better? Going out and having a one-night stand. And I was like, I don't think that'll make me feel better. I'm pretty sure that'll make me feel worse. And because I said that to her, she decided that I was then judging her, which was not my intention, but just even making your own choices to do something that's good for you, that you know is not going to continue to damage you, that's seen as a form of intolerance. And that is exactly what I found with witchcraft and the New Age. So I had this YouTube channel and I would do tons and tons of research onto like the origins of all of these occult practices, what they were actually for, what they did, who invented it, who wrote about it. And then I would present these videos outlining what it was. And I would say, okay, this is risky, don't do that. And there were plenty of people who followed the channel who were like, great, good, I've tried that also and it is risky, so thanks. But there would be a whole section of people who were like, stop infringing on my rights. And it's like, I'm not infringing on your rights. I'm just pointing out reality. You can make your own decisions. But it was sort of like coming up against people who were like, there's no harm in smoking. But there is. Sorry. So in the end with my YouTube channel, I think I ended up spending most of my time making videos telling people to not do stuff. Or I would, like, the only advice videos that I did were ones where it's like, okay, this is how you cleanse, and this is how you protect, and then warning people about all the risks. And I kind of turned around and looked at all of my content and I was like, this is bad. What am I doing? This is so risky. So yeah, if you actually like do all of your research, if you're in these sorts of practices and you do the research and you actually look into it, you end up coming back to Christianity. Because like essentially what I was doing was kind of being like the high school sex ed teacher who's like, this is how you put on a condom, this is how you get birth control, here is a rape whistle, this is what that rash looks like, this is what genital warts looks like. What I learned from that experience is there is a particular context of spiritual activity which is safe and which is good for you. And the same actually goes for sex, because essentially when you are opening yourself up to spiritual activity and you're opening yourself up for sexual activity, if you're not discerning about what you are getting very close to, then you can end up with all sorts of problems. So both of these things need to be put into the context of God and what he actually teaches through the Bible. And neither of those things should involve a hobo at the park. Thank you, Ali Wong, for that mental picture. So I've always been a fairly cautious person, which makes it kind of strange that I even went into witchcraft in the first place, but that's kind of the world these days. It's like, it's so easy to do that. But even though I wrote about it and I talked about it through YouTube, I would probably be classified as a bit of a prude by most of the witches because I did not engage in promiscuous spiritual activity, because I knew that there was an inherent risk of STDs, spiritually transmitted demons. On extremely rare occasions, some people just luck out and don't have really significant problems from being in the New Age and doing stuff like that. But I would say that that's more of an exception than the rule, or perhaps they're just not talking about it. Because what I saw with a lot of different people and what I saw with myself is there were side effects, and it's not as obvious as being demonically attacked. But when you get into that sort of spiritual activity, what you end up with is like chronic health problems, toxic relationships, sleep problems, trouble with finances, and addictive tendencies. Now, I did not have a substance addiction, and most people don't, because that's kind of like an obvious problem. But what most people don't realize is that divination is extremely addictive. So there was a period in my life where I was basically addicted to tarot and oracle cards. And I would compulsively consult cards because I felt absolutely paralyzed to make decisions. I was constantly looking for answers from random spirits. I thought I was consulting God, but you do not consult God through divination. So the answers that you get are really, really misleading. And I've talked to other people who've had similar experiences. Sometimes it's very, very damaging what they end up with. So I kind of see divination as a bit similar to having a gambling addiction, because you get this crap advice from the cards and then you follow it and it leads you astray, and then you're like, oh bugger, like what do I do? So you go back and you consult the same freaking cards. And it's exactly like someone with a gambling addiction saying, oh bugger, I've lost $20,000, I better go gamble some more so I can pay it off. Doesn't work that way. So the New Age and witchcraft are spiritual practices that only ever foster confusion. So they tend to attract people who are already pretty confused and seeking something. And then they give you little crumbs of half-truths and you try to follow it, but it just makes things worse. And what I found coming back to Christianity after that mind meld is that the Bible is not an obscure text. It is not ambiguous. It's very, very straightforward, but the thing is people don't like it because it tells them not to do stuff. The Bible is kind of like that high school sex ed teacher that just says abstinence. So people are like, but I wanna! And the teacher's like, no, just don't. And that's why it really is the narrow gate. So in Matthew 7:13-14 it says, enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and there are many who go in by it. Because narrow is the gate and difficult is the way which leads to life, and there are few who find it. And that's the thing about the Bible, is you will not get wishy-washy, highly permissive answers. You'll get an answer, but most people won't like it. In the first letter of Peter, chapter 5, verse 8, it says, be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. And that's the thing, like if you're not aware of the pitfalls, then you will encounter endless amounts of stumbling blocks. And because witchcraft is purely trying to manipulate things for your own ends, whether people like to admit that or not, that's what it is. That's what manifestation is. You can't manipulate God. You can only get that kind of power from the other source. And the other source comes with a price, and it also comes with a huge array of risks. It's not clean and sober spirituality. It's promiscuous and mind-alteringly bamboozling spirituality. And one of the things that I advised against in my videos was like using mind-altering substances for spiritual contact, because you have absolutely no control over what happens in that situation. But that is exactly what gets pushed. There's all of these new age people on YouTube and on the internet who are like, take ayahuasca, take DMT, smoke pot, do all this crap to your body. Literally shut down your mental faculties so that you cannot discern for yourself what is real and what is good. So yeah, like eventually I woke up to myself and I was like, this is insane. This is the spiritual equivalent of a one-night stand. And if someone wants to do that with their life, God gives us free will, so they can. But they shouldn't delude themselves that this is either good for them or that it comes with no risks. So yeah, that's my take on one of the biggest pitfalls with practicing any kind of spirituality outside of God. You are opening yourself up to all sorts of just random things that you have no control over. Alright guys, stay safe out there and I will see you next time. Bye.